Hi folks, you're with Tassus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for joining this live stream chat. And in this chat, I'd like to talk about how we define and identify and understand goodness and righteousness in this age of madness that we live in. Now, there are a few things that are concerning, I think, to most people, is that the globalist left and their sort of pathfinder, pathbeater mobs, they're prepared to engage in any illegality, any vote rigging, any perjury in court, anything at all, burning down of buildings, killing people, beating people up. They're prepared to do any of that and to say, well, it's okay when we do it. But if some people go into the capital on a pretty mild protest in the overall scheme of things, some of whom just wander around taking selfies in the Capitol building, they've committed terrible, heinous crimes and can get thrown in prison. But if you're a Black Lives Matter goon and you go and burn down a police precinct building or a courtroom or something like that, that's fine, because it's okay when we do it. It's only bad if you do it. So if a black person kills 100 black people, then, well, you know, okay, he's a criminal. But if a white person does it, for whatever the reason, it's a hate crime, and it's international headlines, and it's sensationalized to the shit house. So this is the difference in it's okay when we do it. So the argument that, as I understand it at least, that they put forward is that we act in a good cause, and because that cause is moral and good, then anything we do that's evil is also now good. But you guys, you're all bad, you're all Nazis, you're all fascists, no matter what you do, whether it's good or not, you've committed an act of evil, but when we do it, it's okay. So that's kind of the setting there. Now, the identification and understanding and appreciation, or even definition of what's good and righteous, has been going on for thousands of years, and we're still talking about it, suggesting it's something that maybe is unresolved or only very temporarily gets resolved. And the idea that might is right, and whoever's got the power is the one that decides what's good or bad or in between. There's certainly practical merit in that view. But so let's do a bit of an explore on defining and understanding goodness and righteousness. Now, for some reason, this must have been with me as a kid, because I remember watching reruns of the 1960s William Shatner Star Trek thing, which I thought was like, wow, when I was a kid. So I was, I don't know, 10 years old, something like that. And I remember an episode where there was an alien that was trying to understand the difference between good and evil. And so there was some bad guy against, the Captain Kirk good guy, and they had to pick three characters from history, one that represented evil, the other represented goodness. So Kirk picked, I think it was Abraham Lincoln and some others, and the other guy picked like Genghis Khan, for example. So that's kind of how it went, and they were supposed to battle it out and to see which would end up supreme. And at the end, the alien said, well, I can't tell the difference. You each claim to be representing goodness, or you claim the other guy is representing badness, but your methods are the same, your practices and procedures are all the same. So in the end, I can't tell the difference between you. And as a kid, with my simplistic understanding of the universe then, I saw that as quite profound. And again, the question stayed in my mind as a 10-year-old, what indeed is the difference? We can also look at it in, say, the story of Alice in Wonderland, written by Lewis Carroll, who was an English academic. And he had a situation where, this is in his fantasy, Alice in Wonderland, where Alice turned up on the beach, and there were these oysters there that had arms and legs and spoke. So, but the oysters were going to be eaten by two characters in the novel, the walrus and the carpenter, and Alice was faced with the proposition of deciding who was the good, or the most good, or the most bad out of the walrus and the carpenter, and the the dilemma she had was as follows. The walrus had eaten as many oysters, had eaten the most oysters. He'd eaten for example, twice as many oysters as the carpenter, but he was still hungry at the end of it, whereas the carpenter had eaten half as many oysters as the walrus, but simply was so full he couldn't eat any more. He just couldn't even fit one more oyster in. So Alice was, well, who's the worst? Well, the walrus is the worst because he ate the most oysters. Okay, then, said Alice, you're the bad one. But the carpenter pointed out, or the walrus pointed out rather, well, the carpenter ate as many as he could, whereas I'm still hungry. So if the carpenter could have eaten more, then he would have. So therefore, he's really the worst because he ate as many as he could, whereas I could have eaten more but didn't, explains the walrus. So Alice said, well, the carpenter's wrong. The carpenter's, well, hold on, I didn't eat the most. He ate the most. Well, then the walrus is the baddest. And so Alice was in this dilemma. And again, as a kid, I think, first off, I remember that. I think somebody might be reading it to me, maybe my folks or grandparents or something like that. But the whole thing was how do you determine the difference between right and wrong and good and bad, and thus how can you determine punishments? Now we can go back to things like the basics of the 10 Commandments. Don't steal and don't bear false witness against your neighbour and these sorts of things. And I think they pretty much stand up to the test of time there in terms of defining goodness. Now, some of the 10 Commandments maybe haven't really withstood the test of time quite as well. But there are some of the commandments that have, the ones I just mentioned, and some others which I can't off the top of my head. Now there's the 7 deadly sins. We could use that as a frame of reference. Sloth, gluttony, and things like that. So that too could be a basis for understanding goodness. But in a complex world, if anything, we live in a complex world at the moment, then defining what is good and thus from that acceptable behaviour and by extension from that punishments, if any, that should be meted out. And if we have a situation where independent courts and facts and evidence and the rule of law, due legal process, then we're obviously much further in front to having a society that if not resting on goodness and righteousness, at least is not unfairly punishing those who are blameless and not guilty. And really we're in a situation now where people are being blamed for what they might think or what they might believe, or because they don't think what someone else says they should think or believe, and for really ideological crimes. And once we go into ideological crimes, then we've gone past facts, we've gone past evidence, we've gone past right and wrong. We've entered into territory where goodness and evil can be just arbitrarily determined based on ideological presumptions and assertions, which is, I think, largely where we are now. So this is something to be very concerned about, and I'm stating the obvious there, I guess. But if we come back to this idea of determining goodness and righteousness, I talk to people that say, well, any breaking of the law, any rigging of elections, any fixing of ballots, anything is acceptable, no matter how illegal, no matter how beyond the bounds it is, anything's acceptable to get rid of Trump, anything. But why? It's an ideological presumption. He's bad, therefore anything we do that's bad is not as bad as he's bad. So again, we move into the realms of the ideological, the relative bad, where there's big bad and bigger bad and not so big bad. But I think it's madness, and which is, of course, the situation we're in at the moment in terms of understanding that. So we've lost good and bad. Now, once we head into the ideological area of this, then it's murky, no matter who's coming at it and no matter their good intentions. What does work, and we know has worked and has withstood the test of time, is the facts. If you want to accuse someone of wrongdoing, fine, you go ahead, but they should suffer no punishment until you can prove it in an independent court of law with facts, with evidence, with proof, corroboration, and so on. Now, if you can't do that, then you shut the fuck up, because you leave that person alone, and they are guiltless and blameless until someone, the accuser, can prove otherwise. And really, that's the best standard that throughout history that the humankind has come up with. Because when we depart from that, we get ideological. No matter which way the pendulum might swing, it becomes ideological. And we look back at the things like, or instances like the Spanish Inquisition, where if you didn't go to church on a certain day or whatever, it could be because you're sick, or maybe you're looking after a relative. It could have been anything, but just because you didn't go to church, it could be asserted some kangaroo bullshit court, and you've got to prove that you're not in league with the devil. That's quite an extreme example of ideology, of course, but if we realise that once we head down the ideological path, that's where we go. But this is what the globalists want. That they want people who are determined to be guilty or innocent, or have good thoughts or not good thoughts, purely based on ideology, which is very much any tyrannical regime, particularly the communist regimes. They're driven by ideology, whether it's Stalin or Pol Pot or Chairman Mao or those crazies in North Korea. It doesn't matter. Once you go down that ideological path, goodness and righteousness can be determined arbitrarily without the slightest reference to facts or anything like that. So that's my take on this, and I could go on here for quite a while actually, but I think that'll do for the moment. I look forward to your comments below. How can we define goodness and righteousness, and is simply an independent court of law dealing only in facts and corroboration and so on? Is that the way to do it? I'll close this. Quite some years ago now, there was a case where someone had been run over run down by a motor vehicle. I understand it was an accident, but one of the people who was being cross-examined, or who's a witness and was being examined, said that the driver had knocked down the pedestrian or the person, whoever it was, and he had seen it. So, but under cross-examination, it was revealed that he actually hadn't seen it. He'd seen the car drive over the prone body that was on the road, but he hadn't actually seen the car run down, as in bang into have a collision or an impact with the person. Now, it was maybe a trick of the mind, maybe it was malice. I'm not really sure, but that guy nearly went to prison for perjury in the court of law, and that's, you may think, well, gee, that's an argument, but no, it's not. If his testimony had been pivotal, then somebody could have gone to prison for effectively, second or third degree murder. But because it was revealed under cross-examination, he actually hadn't seen it. What he'd seen was a car driving over a body that was already on the ground. Then that little difference in information was critical to determining guilt or innocence of the accused. And that's a lesson it certainly stuck with me as a young man. That's a lesson that is worth considering for all of us, that once you deviate from the facts, even by a tiny or a small degree, you go into an area of human frailty of which ideology is fraught. And that's not a good place to be. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.